The edge of Zalthari space was quiet. It was always quiet out here. In the outer patrol zone called the Gray Line, nothing much happened. Ships passed through, scanned the empty stars, and went home. That was the job of the scout ship Vral's Watch, and its captain, a tall, gray-skinned Ophidian named Seskar, liked it that way. Seskar had served the Zalthari Empire for 30 cycles. He had seen pirates, he had seen rogue asteroids, he had even seen a dying star collapse from a safe distance. He thought he had seen everything space could show him. He was wrong. It started as a small blip on the long-range sensor array. One of the junior officers, a young Ophidian named Tiv, called out from her station. "Captain, I have a contact. Distance is far, but it is moving on an odd path." Seskar walked over, his long body moving in the smooth, gliding way of his people. He looked at the screen. A single dot blinked steadily near the edge of detection range. "Odd how?" he asked. "It is not following any known trade route. It is not broadcasting any Empire transponder code. And Captain, its engine signature does not match anything in our database." Seskar's inner eyelids blinked, a sign of mild interest among his kind. "Probably a rogue mining ship, or debris with a strange orbit. Bring us closer, slowly. No need to alarm anyone." The Vral's Watch moved forward, gliding through the dark. As the distance closed, the sensors sharpened their picture. What had been a single dot became a shape, a ship, a real ship, metal and lights, moving through open space with no fear at all. Tiv's voice cracked slightly. "Captain, I am getting a full profile now." "Report it." "The vessel is... It is small, Captain. Smaller than one of our own patrol corvettes. But the power readings coming off it are..." She paused, checking her instruments twice. "They are higher than a Zalthari battlecruiser." The bridge went silent. Every crew member turned to look at their own screens, hoping Tiv had made a mistake. She had not. Seskar moved to her station and looked himself. The numbers on the screen did not change no matter how many times he blinked. A ship no bigger than a supply runner was putting out enough raw energy to power a small city, and the readings kept climbing the closer they got. "That is not possible," he said quietly. "No engine that size should produce numbers like that. Recalibrate the sensors." "There must be an error." Tiv's claws moved fast across her console. "Recalibrated, Captain. The numbers are the same." The ship on the screen did not look like a warship at all. It had no obvious weapon turrets, no thick plating, no aggressive design. It looked plain. Almost boring, rectangular in shape, with a few blinking lights and a name painted in strange letters along its hull. "Is Wandering Star." "ISV," Seskar repeated, reading the translated letters that scrolled below the image. "Independent Survey Vessel." This word, human. Do we have that in our records? The ship's computer searched through old Empire archives. It took several seconds, which for a computer that fast was a very long time. "One entry found, Captain," the computer's flat voice said. "Species designation, human. Status, unconfirmed. Last recorded contact, approximately 300 cycles ago. Notes: species vanished from known space after internal conflict, presumed extinct or self-isolated. Threat level, unknown. Listed as low priority, due to lack of recent data." Seskar stared at the small, plain-looking ship on his screen. "Low priority, unknown, presumed extinct. Send a hail," he ordered. "Standard first contact protocol. Let us not be rude, whatever they are." The message went out, translated automatically into radio waves that any modern species should understand. There was a pause. Then, a reply came back, and it was almost shockingly casual. A human voice, warm and a little bit amused, filled the bridge speakers. "Hey there, this is the Wandering Star, out of Sol System, currently doing a mineral survey run. You're the first ship we've seen out here in a while. Nice to meet you. Who are we talking to?" Seskar exchanged a look with Tiv. The voice did not sound like a soldier. It did not sound like a threat. It sounded like someone chatting with a neighbor over a fence. "This is Captain Seskar, of the Zalthari Empire scout vessel Vral's Watch. We are conducting a routine patrol of this sector. May I ask the purpose of your presence here?" Sure thing, Captain. Like I said, mineral survey. We're mapping asteroid density for future mining claims. Nothing exciting. You guys got a name for this star cluster? Our charts are pretty old around here. Seskar almost laughed at how normal the conversation sounded, except his sensors kept showing him numbers that made no sense. He looked again at the power output reading. It had not gone down. If anything, it had crept up slightly. As if the ship was simply idling, like a predator resting but still breathing hard. This sector is called the gray line by our navigation charts, Seskar replied carefully. May I ask? Your vessel's power readings are unusually high for its size. Is everything functioning correctly aboard your ship? There was a short pause before the human voice answered, and when it did, there was a small laugh in it. Oh yeah, that's normal for us. Old habit. We build our stuff with a lot of extra capacity, just in case. You know how it is. Better safe than sorry. Seskar did not know how it was. No species he knew built civilian ships with battlecruiser-level power reserves just in case. He looked at Tiv, whose scales had gone slightly pale, a sign of stress among Ophidians. Captain, Tiv whispered, should I alert Fleet Command? Seskar thought about it. Protocol said, any unknown vessel with power readings above a certain threshold should be reported immediately. This ship was far, far above that threshold, but the voice on the radio sounded so calm, so friendly, that something in him hesitated. Still, protocol was protocol. Send the report, he said. Flag it as high priority. Include full sensor logs. As Tiv worked, the human ship suddenly adjusted its course, angling slightly toward the Vral's watch. It was not an aggressive move, more like someone turning to face a new person at a party. But every alarm on the Zalthari bridge lit up at once, as the ship's sensors tracked the change in vector. They are altering course to intercept, the ship's computer announced. Belay that, Seskar said quickly, though his hearts, both of them, were beating faster now. It is only a course change. Do not raise shields. Do not provoke them. The human voice came back, still calm. Hope that's okay. Figured since we're chatting, might as well come say a proper hello face to face. Or, screen to screen, I guess. Don't worry, we're friendly. Mostly here for rocks, not trouble. Seskar watched the small ship grow larger on the view screen as it approached. Up close, it looked even more plain than the sensors suggested. There were scuff marks on the hull, small dents, patches where repairs had clearly been done by hand rather than by pristine factory drones. It looked like a ship that had been used hard and cared for by people who did not have unlimited resources. And yet the power readings kept climbing. Captain, Tiv said, her voice shaking slightly, I am reading weapon systems now. Small ones, nothing like the power core. But, Captain, they are not even activated. These are just standby readings, passive systems. Passive readings that strong, Seskar murmured, and they have not even armed anything. He thought of every ship he had ever served on, every weapon system he understood. A ship that size, built for surveying rocks and dust, should not need weapons at all, and if it did, they should be small and simple. Instead, the passive standby power alone from the Wandering Star's weapon bays matched the active combat output of a Zalthari heavy cruiser. Sir, incoming message from Fleet Command, the communications officer called out. They received our report. They are ordering us to maintain distance and observe only. No engagement. No further scans that might be seen as aggressive. Seskar let out a breath. That, at least, matched his own instincts. Understood. Reply that we comply. The human voice crackled back over the speakers, cheerful as ever. Everything all right over there, Captain? You all went quiet for a second. Everything is fine, Seskar said, trying to keep his own voice steady. We were simply discussing protocol with our command. No worries. Take your time. We're not in a rush. Actually, hey, since we're here, you mind if I ask you something? Are there other ships nearby? Other empires? That kind of thing? We've been out of contact with a lot of the galaxy for a real long time. Kind of catching up. Seskar considered his answer carefully. There are several major powers in this region of space, yes. The Zalthari Empire is among the largest. There is also the Creel Assembly, the Ophidian Concord, of which I am a member, and several smaller free systems. Cool, cool. Good to know. We'll try not to step on any toes. Anyway, I should let you get back to your patrol. Nice meeting you, Captain Carr. Hope we cross paths again sometime, hopefully under friendlier circumstances than a scary sensor reading, huh? The human ship turned smoothly and continued on its original course, as if the entire conversation had been nothing more than two neighbors waving over a fence. Seskar watched it go, his sensors still locked on, still recording numbers that made his engineering officers whisper nervously among themselves. "Captain," Tiv said quietly, once the human ship was well out of weapons range. "What was that?" Seskar did not answer right away. He kept his eyes on the shrinking dot on the view screen, the small, plain, scuffed-up survey ship that could, according to every reading his instruments gave him, have destroyed his entire vessel without even using its weapons at full power. "I do not know," he finally said, "but I believe Fleet Command is about to have a very bad day." He was right. Within the hour, the sensor logs from the Vral's watch were forwarded up the chain of command, from the local sector base to the regional fleet headquarters, and finally, flagged as an emergency priority, straight to the desk of Grand Admiral Thesserin Vok, one of the most senior military officers in the entire Zalthari Empire. Thesserin Vok was a broad, heavily built Zalthari with decades of combat experience. He had fought pirates, put down rebellions, and once personally commanded a fleet that ended a 3-cycle war with the Creel Assembly. He did not scare easily. He had earned a reputation across the Empire for staying calm, even when entire star systems were burning around him. When he read the report from the Vral's watch, his hands, for the first time in a very long time, trembled slightly as he held the datapad. "This cannot be correct," he said to his aide, a nervous young officer named Dessa. "A survey ship, a single, unarmed. No, barely armed survey ship, putting out more raw power than one of our battle cruisers?" "The sensor logs have been checked 3 times, Admiral," Dessa said. "The scout captain, Seskar, is an experienced officer. He does not make mistakes with his instruments." Thesserin Vok set the datapad down slowly on his desk, staring at the strange picture of the small, plain vessel. He thought of the ancient archive entry, the one word that had sat quietly in Empire records for 300 cycles, gathering dust, ignored, forgotten, human. Status: unconfirmed. "Get me the Galactic Council," he said quietly, "immediately, and pull every scrap of old data we have on this species called human, every rumor, every legend, every half-finished report from 3 centuries ago. I want it all on my desk within the hour." Dessa hesitated. "Admiral, is this truly a matter for the Council? It was only one ship." Thesserin Vok looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was not anger. It was something closer to fear. "One ship," he repeated slowly, "that could have destroyed an entire patrol group without even trying, and it was smiling while it did it. If that is what one of their survey ships looks like, Dessa, I do not want to know what their warships look like. Make the call." Across the galaxy, in the great crystal chamber where the Galactic Council met, the first alarms of what would soon become known as the human question were about to begin. No one in that chamber yet understood how deeply that question would shake the foundations of everything they believed about power, about war, and about their place among the stars. The wandering star continued on its quiet, unhurried survey run, mapping asteroids, humming an old human song over its own internal speakers, completely unaware, or perhaps completely uncaring, that it had just changed the course of galactic history, with nothing more than a friendly hello. The Galactic Council chamber was a massive circular room built from clear crystal mined from a dead star's core. Light from 1,000 distant suns passed through its walls, scattering into soft colors across the floor. It was meant to remind every member species that they were small compared to the galaxy around them. Today, that lesson felt very real, though not for the reason the chamber's builders had intended. Representatives from a dozen major species sat in their assigned seats, arranged in a great ring. There were the tall, gray Ophidians, calm and thoughtful, the short, quick-moving krill, covered in fine fur, who spoke in rapid bursts, the heavily armored Threxians, whose entire bodies were natural exoskeletons, built for war and pride, and near the center of the ring, in the seat reserved for the largest single power in known space, sat the representative of the Zalthari Empire, a stern older Zalthari woman named High Counselor Irena Voss. Grand Admiral Thesarin Vok stood before them all, his broad shoulders squared, though his hands stayed clasped tightly behind his back to hide their slight shaking. "Honored council members," he began, his voice carrying through the chamber's natural acoustics, "I bring before you an urgent matter. 3 days ago, one of our scout vessels made contact with a ship belonging to a species listed in our archives as human." A murmur passed through the chamber. Several council members exchanged glances. The Creel representative, a small furred being named Chiktar, leaned forward with obvious curiosity. "Humans?" Chiktar said, his voice quick and high-pitched. Yes. I remember this name from old trade records. A species from a system called Sol, was it not? They vanished long ago. We assumed extinction, or perhaps a retreat into isolation." "That assumption may have been incorrect," Thesarin Vok said grimly. "The vessel we encountered was a small survey ship, unarmed, or nearly so. Its stated purpose was mapping asteroid fields for mining." He paused, gathering himself. Its power output readings exceeded those of a Zalthari heavy battlecruiser. The chamber went silent. Even the Threxian representative, a massive armored being named Kortho Dral who rarely showed emotion of any kind, shifted slightly in his seat. "That is not possible," High Counselor Rena Voss said flatly. "No civilian vessel, of any known species, produces power output at that scale. There must be an error in your instruments, Admiral." "I would agree with you, Counselor, if this were an isolated report from a single junior officer," Thesarin Vok said. "But the readings were confirmed by our sector command's own analysis teams. And there is more." He gestured, and behind him, a holographic display flickered to life, showing the recorded data from the Vral's watch. The human vessel's weapon systems, which were never even fully activated during the encounter, registered passive power signatures, comparable to our own active combat systems at full readiness. Kortho Dral spoke for the first time, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to shake the crystal floor slightly. "You are telling this council that an unarmed survey ship was, in practice, more powerful than one of our warships, and it did not even need to try." "That is precisely what I am telling this council, yes." The chamber erupted into noise. Dozens of representatives began speaking at once, some in alarm, some in disbelief, some already demanding immediate military mobilization. High Counselor Irena Voss raised a hand, and slowly, the chamber quieted. "Admiral Vok," she said, "what do we actually know about this species? You mentioned old archive records. Share them with the council." Thesarin Vok nodded to his aide, and the hologram shifted to display old, faded records, some of them damaged, some incomplete, pieced together from scattered Empire archives that had sat forgotten for 3 centuries. "What we know is limited," he admitted. "Humans originate from a single star system, designated Sol, located far on the galactic rim, well outside our normal trade routes. Approximately 300 cycles ago, brief contact was made by an independent trading vessel. The report described a species physically similar to Ophidians in general body shape, though without scales, and with notably shorter lifespans than most council species." "Shorter lifespans," Chiktar repeated, tilting his furred head. "How much shorter?" "The old report estimated an average lifespan of perhaps 80 to 100 cycles, compared to our own average of several hundred." A ripple of surprise went through the chamber. Among most council species, a lifespan that short was almost unthinkable, associated only with small, simple creatures, not with a spacefaring civilization. "And yet," Thesarin Vok continued, "the same old report noted that humans had, at the time of contact, only just begun expanding beyond their home system. They were considered primitive, low priority, not worth further study." He paused. The report also noted, and I quote directly, that human society at the time was, in the trader's words, engaged in near constant internal conflict, seemingly by nature, though this did not appear to prevent rapid technological advancement. Kortho Dral's armored plates shifted with a soft grinding sound, the Threxian equivalent of a frown. Internal conflict. You mean war. They fought among themselves. Apparently so, Counselor. Frequently, and for most of their recorded history, according to the fragments we have. And yet somehow, in 300 cycles, a species with an 80-cycle lifespan, who fought constant wars among themselves, developed technology capable of outperforming an empire that has existed, peacefully among its own people, for over 2,000 cycles. The chamber fell into an uneasy silence. High Counselor Irena Voss leaned back in her seat, her expression troubled. "There is something you are not saying, Admiral," she said quietly. "I can see it in your face. Speak plainly." Thesarin Vock hesitated only a moment. During the encounter, our scout captain spoke directly with the human crew. Their tone, Counselor, was friendly, casual. They did not behave as though they saw our ship as a threat, nor did they seem to consider their own vessel particularly remarkable. When asked about the extreme power readings, the human pilot dismissed it as, and again I quote, "normal for us. Old habit. We build our stuff with a lot of extra capacity, just in case." "Just in case of what?" Chiktar asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That," Thesarin Vock said, "is exactly the question that concerns me most." The council chamber buzzed with low, urgent conversation. Small groups of representatives leaned toward one another, whispering in their own languages, translators working overtime to keep up. High Counselor Irena Voss let this continue for almost a full minute before raising her hand again for silence. "We have 3 possible paths before us," she said, once the chamber had quieted. "First, we treat this as a singular anomaly, perhaps a misunderstanding, or an unusual prototype vessel, and we take no significant action beyond continued observation. Second, we treat this as a potential threat, and we begin military preparations, perhaps even a preemptive show of force, to establish dominance before this species can expand further. Third, we treat this as an opportunity, and we attempt formal, careful diplomatic contact to better understand what we are truly dealing with before deciding on any further action." Cortho Dral spoke immediately, his deep voice firm. "The Threxian Assembly recommends the second path. If this species possesses power beyond our own, and a history of constant war, we cannot afford to wait and hope for the best. We must show strength before they see us as weak." "With respect, Counselor," Chiktar said quickly, "showing strength to a species that already outmatches us in raw power seems unwise. If we provoke them, and they respond in kind, we may not survive the encounter. The Krill Assembly recommends caution. Observation first." "Caution is not the same as inaction," said another voice, calm and measured. It came from a seat near the edge of the chamber, belonging to a slender, blue-skinned representative of the smaller Vethani Concord, a species known throughout the galaxy for its skill in diplomacy and language. Her name was Ambassador Lyra Sen. I have spent much of my career studying old records of extinct or lost civilizations, including the fragments we have on humanity. If I may, Counselor Voss, I would like to add some context that may be useful. Irena Voss nodded. "Please, Ambassador." Lyra Sen rose from her seat, her movements graceful and unhurried, a stark contrast to the tense energy filling the rest of the chamber. "There is an old theory among historians of my people, drawn from the few surviving records of early contact with humanity. It suggests that human conflict, far from being a weakness, may have been the very engine of their rapid advancement. Species who live in danger, who fight for survival against threats both external and internal, often develop technology and strategy far faster than species who have known long peace, such as our own empire, or my own Concord." "You are saying their wars made them stronger," Cortho Dral said, his voice heavy with something between respect and unease. "I am saying it is possible," Lyra Sen said carefully. "I am also saying that a species accustomed to constant conflict may not react well to a show of force. If the Threxian Assembly's suggestion is followed, and we attempt to intimidate a people who have spent their entire history fighting for survival, even against each other, we may simply be inviting the exact kind of response we most wish to avoid." The chamber went quiet again, this time with a different kind of silence, one filled with careful thought rather than panic. High Counselor Urena Voss studied the hologram still displaying the faded, 3-century-old data on humanity, 80-cycle lifespans, constant internal war, rapid, almost unnatural technological growth, and now, a single survey ship that could, by all readings, have destroyed a Zalthari patrol group without breaking a sweat. Grand Admiral Vok, she said finally, what is the current status of the human vessel in question? It continues its stated survey mission, Counselor. Our scout ship maintained observation at a respectful distance before returning to report. No aggressive action was taken by either side. And do we have any indication of where this vessel came from? Is it alone, or is it part of a larger presence nearby? Thesarin Vok's expression tightened slightly. That is the part of the report I have not yet shared, Counselor. Before departing, the human pilot mentioned, quite casually, that they had been out of contact with a lot of the galaxy for a real long time, and were catching up. This suggests, Counselor, that this was not an isolated wandering ship. It suggests deliberate, organized re-expansion into known space. The words hung in the crystal chamber like a held breath. Every representative present understood the weight of what had just been said. A species with unknown but clearly formidable power, a long history of internal conflict that may have sharpened rather than weakened them, and now, apparently, a deliberate return to a galaxy that had once dismissed them as primitive and unimportant. High Counselor Urena Voss stood slowly, her long shadow falling across the crystal floor as the light of 1,000 distant stars shifted around her. This council will not act rashly, she said, her voice carrying a firmness that settled the room. We will not provoke a war we do not understand, nor will we sit blindly while an unknown power expands at our borders. I propose we form an official diplomatic envoy to make formal contact with this species called humanity, to learn who they are, what they want, and what exactly we are truly facing. Korthodral's armored frame shifted uneasily, but he did not argue further. Chiktar let out a small breath of relief. Ambassador Lyra Sen inclined her head respectfully. All those in favor, Urena Voss said, of forming a diplomatic envoy to establish formal contact with humanity. Please indicate now. One by one, hands, claws, and other appendages rose across the chamber, until the vote was clear and nearly unanimous. Then it is decided, Urena Voss said. Grand Admiral Vok, you will assist in preparing a fleet escort for our diplomatic team, though I remind this council and yourself especially, Admiral, that this escort is for protection and presence only. There will be no aggressive action taken without explicit council approval. Thesarin Vok bowed his head. Understood, Counselor, though I would ask this council to remember what my scout captain reported. This species did not seem impressed by military strength. If anything, our best chance of a peaceful outcome may lie not in the size of our fleet, but in how we choose to speak to them. As the council began the long process of selecting envoys and drafting formal contact protocols, few in that chamber realized just how small their understanding of humanity truly was. The old records were fragments, guesses, half-truths pieced together from a single brief encounter 3 centuries in the past. What awaited them, out among the stars, was a civilization that had grown, changed, and rebuilt itself many times over since then, shaped by wars fought not against alien empires, but against itself, against its own worst instincts, until finally, painfully, it had found a way to turn that hard-won strength outward, toward the stars, with curiosity, rather than conquest in mind. But old fears die slowly, and old habits of caution, especially among species who had known centuries of comfortable peace, would not be so easily set aside. As the council chamber slowly emptied and its members returned to their own worlds to prepare, whispers of the human question spread quickly through the greater galaxy, from grand capital worlds to distant frontier outposts, carried by nervous traders and cautious diplomats alike. Somewhere far beyond the edge of the gray line, the Wandering Star continued its quiet survey work, its crew entirely unaware that an entire galaxy had just begun watching them, holding its breath, wondering what exactly humanity had become in the long silence since anyone had last bothered to check. The diplomatic fleet took nearly 3 weeks to assemble. It was, by Zalthari Empire standards, an impressive sight. 12 warships, escorting a single large diplomatic cruiser named the Voice of Unity, gathered at the edge of the gray line, ready to make the jump toward the last known position of the human survey ship. Grand Admiral Thesserin Vok commanded the escort personally, though he had been careful, at High Counselor Yurena Voss's insistence, to keep the fleet's formation defensive rather than aggressive. No weapons would be armed unless directly threatened. No hostile maneuvers of any kind. This was, officially, a mission of peace. Aboard the Voice of Unity, Ambassador Lyra Sen reviewed her notes one final time. She had spent the last 3 weeks studying every fragment of old data the Empire's archives could provide, along with records from her own Vithani Concord, and even a few older, half-forgotten reports from long-retired traders who claimed distant memories of humanity from generations past. It was not much to go on. She felt, more than anything, like she was walking into a room blindfolded, hoping to shake hands with someone whose face she could not see. "Ambassador," came a voice from her cabin's comm system. "We are approaching the coordinates provided by Captain Sess Carr. Human vessel detected, matching the profile from the initial encounter." Lyra Sen closed her datapad and made her way to the observation deck, where a wide viewport looked out onto open space. There, small and plain against the vastness of the stars, was the Wandering Star. Exactly as it had been described. Scuffed hull, simple lines, no obvious weapons visible from the outside. "Open a channel," she said quietly. "Standard first contact greeting, translated Protocol Alpha." A moment later, the same warm, casual human voice from Seskar's report filled the observation deck. "Well, this is a bigger welcoming party than last time. Hey there, folks. This is the Wandering Star. You've got quite the fleet with you." Lyra Sen took a slow breath, steadying herself. "Greetings. I am Ambassador Lyra Sen of the Vithani Concord, speaking on behalf of the Galactic Council. We come in peace, seeking formal contact with representatives of your people. May I ask who I am speaking with?" "Sure thing, Ambassador. This is Captain Ren Okafor, ship's captain and, well, currently the only officer on board, since it's mostly just me and a couple of automated systems out here doing rock surveys. Nice to meet you properly. Sorry if my ship's readings scared your last visitor. That wasn't the plan." Behind Lyra Sen, several of the fleet's military officers exchanged uneasy glances at the casual tone. A single officer, alone on a ship that could apparently match a battlecruiser in power. It did not fit any model of military structure they understood. "Captain Okafor," Lyra Sen continued carefully, "the Galactic Council would like to extend a formal invitation. We would appreciate the opportunity to establish proper diplomatic relations with your government, whatever form that may take. Is there someone with greater authority we might speak to? Perhaps a representative of your home system?" There was a pause before Captain Okafor answered, and when he did, there was a hint of amusement in his voice. "Yeah, that's a bit above my pay grade, Ambassador. I'm just a survey pilot, but I can absolutely pass your message along. Actually, funny thing, we've got a proper diplomatic ship not too far from here, doing outreach work in this general region. Give me a moment to patch you through, if that's all right." Lyra Sen blinked in surprise. "You have other vessels nearby?" "Sure. We've got a few ships doing outreach work across this whole sector, actually. Figured after being quiet for so long, it'd be polite to slowly start saying hello to folks again, rather than just showing up out of nowhere. One moment, please." The channel went briefly silent, filled only with a faint, pleasant human melody that Lyra Sen realized was some kind of hold music. Around her, the observation deck had gone tensely quiet, every officer present holding their breath, waiting to see what a few ships doing outreach work actually meant. When the channel reopened, a new voice came through, calm, measured, clearly more accustomed to formal speech than Captain Okafor had been. "Greetings. This is Director Amara Osei of the United Human Diplomatic Corps, aboard the outreach vessel. Common ground. I understand you're looking to establish contact with representatives of humanity. It's an honor to speak with you, Ambassador Sen." Lyra Sen felt a small measure of relief at the more formal tone. "The honor is ours, Director. On behalf of the Galactic Council, representing the Zalthari Empire, the Creole Assembly, the Ophidian Concord, the Threxian Assembly, and my own Vithani Concord, among others, we extend a formal invitation to open diplomatic relations between humanity and the wider galactic community. We would be glad to accept that invitation, Director Osi replied warmly. Humanity has been, admittedly, somewhat isolated for the past few centuries. We had our reasons, but I won't bore you with old history over an open channel. Perhaps it would be best arranged as a proper meeting? We could host, or if you'd prefer, we're happy to travel to a neutral location of the Council's choosing. That would be most welcome, Director, Lyra Sen said, allowing herself a small, hopeful smile. The Council would suggest the neutral station Aldris Prime, located at the border of Council space. It is well equipped for diplomatic functions and considered secure ground by all major powers. Aldris Prime it is then. We'll coordinate travel details through this channel. I do have one small request, Ambassador, if I may. Of course. Our people have had, let's say, a complicated relationship with large military presences in the past, given some of our own history. Would it be possible to keep the escort fleet at a comfortable distance during any future meetings? Nothing personal, just old habits. We'd like these talks to feel like a conversation between neighbors, not a negotiation under threat. Lyra Sen glanced back at Grand Admiral Thesserin Vok, who stood silently near the observation deck's entrance, his expression carefully neutral, though his hands remained tightly clasped behind his back. She saw the flicker of understanding pass across his face. A species shaped by centuries of internal conflict would naturally be wary of large armed fleets, regardless of stated intentions. That is a very reasonable request, Director, Lyra Sen said. The Council's fleet will maintain a respectful distance during all future proceedings. Wonderful. Thank you for understanding, Ambassador. We're looking forward to finally getting to know our neighbors properly. It's been a long time coming. The channel closed, and for a long moment, the observation deck remained silent. Finally, Grand Admiral Vok stepped forward, his heavy footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Ambassador, he said quietly, did you notice? The captain of that survey ship mentioned a few ships doing outreach work across this whole sector. Not one ship, not two, a few, spread across an entire sector, doing nothing more than casual, friendly first contact work. Lyra Sen nodded slowly, her earlier relief tempering into something more thoughtful. If a species dedicates multiple vessels simply to polite, low-key introductions across a region this large, Admiral, what does that suggest about the resources they consider unremarkable enough to spare for such a task? Thesserin Vok's jaw tightened. It suggests, Ambassador, that whatever fleet they consider truly significant, we have not yet seen even a glimpse of it. 3 days later, the neutral station Aldris Prime buzzed with quiet, controlled activity, as final preparations were made for the historic meeting. Representatives from every major council species had traveled to witness, or at least observe remotely, what many were already calling the most important diplomatic event in generations. Grand Admiral Vok's fleet held position several hours' travel distance away, as promised. A gesture of good faith that had taken considerable convincing among the more cautious members of the council, particularly Cortho Dral, of the Threxian Assembly, who grumbled openly about the wisdom of leaving their strongest ships so far from any potential meeting. If this is some manner of trick, Cortho Dral had argued during final preparations, we will be defenseless. If this is a trick, Ambassador Lyra Sen had replied evenly, then 12 warships several hours away would not have saved us regardless, given what we already know of their capabilities. Our best defense, Counselor, is the same as it has always been in true diplomacy: sincerity. When the human diplomatic vessel, Common Ground, finally arrived at Aldris Prime, docking smoothly and without incident, the entire station seemed to hold its breath. Council representatives gathered in the main assembly hall, a grand chamber designed to comfortably host dozens of different species at once, each section fitted with appropriate atmosphere, gravity, and seating for its intended occupants. The doors to the human section of the docking bay opened, and Director Amara Osei stepped through, followed by a small delegation of 6 other humans. To the watching council members they appeared, physically, remarkably ordinary. Two-legged, two-armed, a variety of skin tones and hair colors, wearing simple, practical clothing rather than elaborate ceremonial robes. Nothing about their appearance suggested the kind of overwhelming power hinted at by the Wandering Star. Sensor readings. Director Osei was a woman of middle years, her dark hair streaked with gray, her expression warm but composed, carrying herself with the calm confidence of someone who had spent a great deal of her life in careful, difficult negotiations. Ambassador Sen, she said, extending a hand in a gesture Lyra Sen recognized from old records as a traditional human greeting. It's a genuine pleasure to finally meet in person. Lyra Sen studied the offered hand for a brief moment, before carefully mimicking the gesture, her slender blue fingers wrapping gently around Director Osei's hand. The pleasure is entirely ours, Director. On behalf of the Galactic Council, welcome to Aldris Prime, and welcome, on a larger scale, back to the wider galactic community. A soft murmur of polite acknowledgement passed through the assembled council representatives. Director Osei smiled and gave a small, respectful bow of her head toward the gathered dignitaries. Thank you all for this invitation, she said, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustics. I understand there's been some concern, following our survey vessel's encounter with your patrol ship. I'd like to address that early, if the Council permits, since I imagine it's weighing heavily on many minds here. High Counselor Urena Voss, seated at the head of the Council's section of the chamber, inclined her head. Please, Director, speak freely. Director Osei nodded, gathering her thoughts. Humanity has a complicated history, one I won't fully unpack today. But the short version is this. For most of our recorded history, we were, as I understand your own records note, a species deeply divided against itself. We fought wars, terrible ones, for a very long time, long after we had already reached the stars within our own solar system. She paused, glancing around at the many alien faces watching her closely. Eventually, and this took us far too long, we learned that survival meant setting aside those old divisions. Not perfectly, not overnight, but enough to finally turn our energy outward instead of inward. Part of that process meant building infrastructure, ships, technology, all of it designed with a great deal of extra safety margin, extra durability, extra capacity, old habits, born from old fears. Our engineers still build that way today, even for something as simple as a mining survey vessel. I imagine that's what your patrol ship encountered. Not a warship, counselors, simply an overbuilt truck. A ripple of surprised murmurs spread through the chamber. Grand Admiral Vok, watching remotely from his position with the fleet, leaned forward sharply at his display screen. An overbuilt truck, Kortho Dral repeated slowly, his deep voice edged with disbelief, produced power output exceeding one of our battle cruisers. Director Osei's expression remained calm, almost apologetic. I understand how that must sound, Counselor, and I promise you, we mean no threat by it. It's simply how we've learned to build things, after learning the hard way what happens when you don't build with enough safety margin. I'd be happy to have our engineers explain the details further, if that would help ease any concerns. The chamber fell into a thoughtful, uneasy silence. Ambassador Lyra Sen studied Director Osei's calm, sincere expression carefully, searching for any hint of deception and finding none that she could detect. And yet, the implications of what had just been said settled slowly, heavily, over every council representative present. If a simple, everyday human survey ship, built with nothing more than old habits of caution in mind, could rival their strongest warships, the true military fleet of humanity, should such a thing exist, was almost too vast a concept for the gathered council to comfortably imagine. High Counselor Werner Voss studied Director Osei for a long moment before finally speaking, her voice carrying carefully through the grand chamber. Director Osei, she said slowly, on behalf of the Galactic Council, we thank you for your honesty today, and we welcome this opportunity to build a lasting, peaceful relationship between our peoples. She paused. However, I believe I speak for this entire chamber when I say, we would very much like to better understand exactly what humanity has built in the centuries since we last knew you. Not out of fear, Director, but out of the simple wisdom of knowing one's neighbors well. Director Osei smiled, a warm, genuine expression that seemed to ease some of the tension gathered in the room. that counselor, is exactly the kind of conversation we were hoping to have. As the formal proceedings continued, moving into the careful, structured process of establishing official diplomatic terms, few in that grand chamber yet realized just how much more there truly was to learn about the quiet, unassuming species that had just walked back into galactic history, wearing simple clothes, offering handshakes, and carrying, whether they meant to or not, the unspoken weight of power that the galaxy had not yet even begun to fully understand. The days following the first formal meeting at Aldris Prime turned into weeks of careful, structured conversation. Both sides moved slowly, testing each step before taking the next, like two people meeting at the edge of a frozen lake, unsure how thick the ice truly was. Ambassador Lyra Sen found herself spending most of her waking hours in meetings with Director Amara Ose and her small team of human diplomats, engineers, and historians. Slowly, carefully, the picture of humanity's true history began to take shape, and it was far larger and far stranger than anything the old Empire archives had suggested. "You have to understand," Director Ose explained one afternoon, sitting across a simple table from Lyra Sen in a private meeting room aboard Aldris Prime. "The report your Empire has on record is from a single brief encounter over 300 years ago with a very young, very fractured version of our species. We were still fighting among ourselves back then. We hadn't even properly united our own solar system yet." "And since then?" Lyra Sen asked, her datapad ready, though she found herself simply listening more than recording. Director Ose paused, choosing her words carefully. "Since then, we went through what our historians call the long correction. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't painless. It took generations. But eventually, humanity stopped fighting itself long enough to look outward instead." She brought up a simple star map on the table's display, showing a modest cluster of systems near the galactic rim. "This is human space today, not an empire in the way your council understands the term. More of a loose alliance of systems, all originally settled from Sol, all still culturally connected, but with a great deal of independence." Lyra Sen studied the map. It was not enormous by Empire standards, perhaps 30 systems in total, a fraction of the size of Zalthari territory. "This does not seem an unusually large territory, Director." "It's not," Ose agreed. "We've been fairly restrained about expansion, mostly out of respect for whatever else might already be living in the systems we've explored. We learned some hard lessons early on about moving too fast, too carelessly." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "But territory was never really the measure we focused on, Ambassador. Survival was." "Survival from what, if I may ask?" Director Ose was quiet for a moment. "There's a part of our history we don't often share right away, mostly because it tends to alarm people. But I think, given the circumstances, you deserve the full picture." She took a slow breath. "About 200 years ago, not long after we finally united as one species, we encountered another spacefaring civilization for the first time. Not your empire, somewhere else, further out along the rim. They were not friendly." Lyra Sen straightened slightly. "There was a conflict?" "There was a war," Ose said simply. "A long one, nearly 40 years, by our calendar. We were young, still finding our footing among the stars, and we very nearly lost. More than once." Her voice grew quieter, heavier with old weight. "We survived that war, Ambassador, but not without cost, and not without changing, permanently, how we thought about building things. Ships, infrastructure, even simple survey vessels, like the one your patrol first encountered. Every single thing we build now carries that old lesson inside it. Build strong, build with margin. Never assume you have enough, because someday you might not." Lyra Sen sat back slowly, the pieces settling into place in her mind. "That is why your survey vessel's power readings matched our battle cruisers. It was never meant as a threat, or even as unusual by your own standards. It was simply built the way you build everything now." "Exactly," Ose said. "It probably sounds strange to you, maybe even a little sad, that we can't build a simple mining ship without that old fear baked into the design. But it kept us alive once, and old habits, especially ones written that deeply into a whole species' engineering culture, don't fade quickly." Lyra Sen considered this carefully. And the war, Director. How did it end? Osei's expression grew distant, thoughtful. We won, eventually. Though won feels like the wrong word for something that costs so much on both sides. The species we fought, we call them the Verith in our records. They eventually sued for peace after we developed technology that let us match, and eventually exceed, their own. It wasn't a happy ending, Ambassador. It was simply survival, but it changed us. It's part of why we chose to pull back afterward, to focus inward for a long while, rebuilding, healing, deciding as a species what kind of neighbors we actually wanted to be to the rest of the galaxy, once we were ready to step back out into it. And now you have decided you are ready, Lyra Sen said quietly. We think so, yes. Cautiously. That's part of why our outreach has been so quiet, so low-key. A few survey ships, a few small diplomatic vessels, testing the waters gently, rather than announcing ourselves with some grand fleet. We didn't want to repeat old mistakes, showing up somewhere new looking like a threat, before we'd even said hello. Lyra Sen was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had just heard. Finally, she asked the question that had been building in her mind since the very first sensor report from Seskar's scout ship. Director Osei, if your survey vessels are built with this kind of defensive strength in mind, purely out of old habit and caution, may I ask, what does a true human warship look like, should the need for one ever arise again? Director Osei's expression grew carefully neutral, and for the first time in their many conversations, Lyra Sen saw a flicker of genuine hesitation cross the human woman's face. That, Osei said slowly, is a fair question, and I understand why you're asking it. I won't insult you by pretending it isn't important, but I hope you'll understand, if I say that's a conversation, better had once a bit more trust has been built between our peoples. Not because we mean to threaten you, Ambassador, quite the opposite. It's precisely because of how that kind of information could be misused, or misunderstood, that we'd rather wait. Lyra Sen nodded slowly, respecting the honesty of the answer, even as a quiet unease settled in her chest. That is a reasonable position, Director. I will not press the matter further today. Later that evening, Lyra Sen requested a private, secure channel with Grand Admiral Thesserin Vok, still stationed with his fleet, at a respectful distance from Aldris Prime. When his image appeared on her display, she recounted the full conversation carefully, watching his expression shift from professional attentiveness to something closer to grim understanding. A 40-year war, he said quietly, once she had finished, fought and won by a species that, at the time, had barely unified itself. And their solution, afterward, was not to build the largest fleet they could, but to quietly restrain themselves, focus inward, and only now, generations later, cautiously step back out. That is my understanding as well, Admiral, Lyra Sen said. Thesserin Vok was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. Ambassador, do you understand what this means? A species capable of not only surviving such a conflict, but of restraining itself afterward, choosing patience and quiet growth over expansion and conquest, despite clearly possessing the power to pursue the latter if they wished. He shook his head slowly. In all my years of service, I have never encountered anything quite like this. Nor have I, Admiral, Lyra Sen admitted. I confess, I find myself both reassured and deeply unsettled by what I have learned. As do I, Vok said. A species that fights only when it must, and grows quietly stronger in the meantime, is a far more concerning long-term neighbor than one who simply wishes to conquer everything in sight. Conquerors can be predicted, planned against. Patient, disciplined strength that is far harder to prepare for. 3 days later, at Director Osei's own suggestion, a small delegation of Council military engineers and Ambassador Lyra Sen were invited aboard the Common Ground for a carefully arranged tour intended to help ease some of the Council's lingering unease by offering a limited but honest look at human civilian technology. What they found there did little to ease anyone's nerves, though not because of any hidden weapons or aggressive displays. Quite the opposite. The ship's chief engineer, a quiet, thoughtful man named Elias Marsh, walked the small delegation through the vessel's systems with patient, plain-spoken explanations, using simple, basic terms wherever possible, to help bridge the gap between human and council engineering concepts. "This is our primary power core," he explained, gesturing toward a surprisingly compact device, humming quietly in the ship's engineering section. "Same basic design we use in most of our civilian vessels these days. Survey ships, cargo haulers, even a lot of our colony infrastructure. It's built with about 4 times the output we'd normally need for day-to-day operations." One of the council engineers, a nervous young Ophidian named Dessa, who had been reassigned from Admiral Vok's staff specifically for her technical expertise, studied the readings on her scanner and let out a soft, involuntary hiss of surprise. 4 times more than necessary? For a cargo ship? "That's right," Marsh said, without a trace of boastfulness, simply stating a fact he clearly considered unremarkable. "Old habit. Like Director Osei probably already told you. We like having room to spare, in case something unexpected happens. Learned that lesson the hard way, more than once." Ambassador Lyra Sen studied the quiet, unassuming power core, humming steadily behind its simple protective housing, and felt a familiar chill settle over her once again. It was not fear, exactly. It was something closer to the slow, dawning realization of just how much she and the entire council still did not understand about the civilization they had so recently welcomed back into the wider galaxy. "Chief Engineer Marsh," she said carefully, "if this is the standard design for your civilian vessels, built with what you describe as extra caution in mind, I find myself increasingly curious, and I hope you will forgive the directness of my question about the difference in scale between this and your dedicated military technology." Elias Marsh's easy, friendly expression grew, just slightly, more careful. "That's a fair thing to wonder about, Ambassador. And I promise, it's not that we're trying to hide anything out of some kind of trick. It's just, some things take a bit more trust to share safely. For everyone's sake, yours included." Lyra Sen inclined her head respectfully, though the unease in her chest did not fully fade. "I understand, Chief Engineer. I will not press the matter." As the tour continued, moving through simple, practical spaces, crew quarters, a small greenhouse growing fresh vegetables, a modest recreational area with old, well-loved books lining a shelf, Lyra Sen found herself struck by how ordinary, how almost comfortingly human it all felt, even as the underlying power humming through the ship's systems told a very different story. It was, she realized, much like the humans themselves seemed to be. Warm, friendly, disarmingly ordinary on the surface, while carrying, quietly and without any apparent need to boast about it, a depth of strength that the rest of the galaxy was only just beginning to understand. That evening, back aboard Aldris Prime, Lyra Sen filed her official report to the Galactic Council, carefully detailing everything she had learned: the long correction, the 40-year war with the Vareth, the deliberate restraint humanity had shown in the decades since, and the unsettling glimpse of civilian technology, built with, by human admission, only a fraction of their true capability on display. High Counselor Yurena Voss read the report late into the night, her expression growing more thoughtful with each passing page. When she finally set the datapad down, she found herself staring out at the vast, star-filled darkness beyond her chamber's window, thinking of the small, plain survey ship that had first stumbled quietly across the gray line, and of the vast, careful, patient civilization that had built it. The galaxy, she realized, had spent 300 years believing humanity gone, forgotten, an unimportant footnote in old archive records. It had been, she now understood, with a growing sense of both relief and quiet unease, a very serious mistake to have looked away for so long. 6 months passed after the first formal meeting at Aldris Prime. In that time, careful diplomacy slowly replaced fear with something closer to cautious respect. Trade agreements were drafted, cultural exchanges began. A small group of human historians even started working alongside Vithani scholars, comparing old records and slowly filling in the gaps of a shared history neither side had fully understood. Grand Admiral Thesserin Vok, who had once trembled reading a single censor report, now found himself in regular contact with Director Amara Osei, the two of them developing an unlikely professional friendship built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of what it meant to carry the weight of protecting one's people. Ambassador Lyra Sen had become, almost without anyone officially deciding it, the Council's leading expert on all things human, a role she embraced with the same careful curiosity she had shown from the very beginning. It was during this time that the Galactic Council formally proposed the final step, full membership for humanity within the Council itself, granting them the same standing, rights, and responsibilities held by the Zalthari Empire, the Creel Assembly, the Threxian Assembly, and every other major power among the stars. The vote was to take place in the same grand crystal chamber where the human question had first been raised, and this time, for the first time in galactic history, a human representative would stand among the council members themselves, rather than simply being discussed from a distance. Director Amara Osei stood at the center of the great circular chamber, the same soft, colorful light filtering down through the crystal walls, scattering gently across the polished floor. Around her, representatives from every major council species watched with a mixture of curiosity, respect, and, in a few remaining cases, lingering caution. Representatives of the Galactic Council, High Counselor Yurena Voss began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. 6 months ago, this body was faced with an unexpected question, one that challenged much of what we believed we understood about power, about history, and about our place among the stars. Today we stand ready to answer that question, not with fear, but with the same careful wisdom this council has always tried to embody. She turned toward Director Osei. Director, on behalf of the Galactic Council, we formally propose full membership for humanity, within our shared community, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. Do you accept, on behalf of your people? Director Osei allowed herself a small, genuine smile, one that seemed to ease some of the remaining tension still lingering in the grand chamber. On behalf of humanity, Counselor Voss, it would be our honor to accept. A soft murmur of approval rippled through the chamber, followed, almost immediately, by a raised hand from Cortho Dral, the Threxian representative, whose caution had never fully faded, even after months of careful diplomacy. Before this vote is finalized, Cortho Dral said, his deep voice steady but firm, I believe this council, and indeed this entire galaxy, still deserves one final answer. Director Osei, an answer you have thus far respectfully declined to give. He paused. What precisely does a true human warship look like? The chamber fell silent, every representative present leaning forward slightly, the old question, the one that had lingered unanswered since that very first encounter, finally being spoken aloud once more. Director Osei was quiet for a moment, glancing briefly toward Ambassador Lyra Sen, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. Finally, Osei spoke, her voice calm and steady. That is a fair question, Counselor Dral, and I believe, after 6 months of careful trust-building between our peoples, it is finally time for an honest answer. She gestured, and a holographic display flickered to life above the chamber's central platform, showing a single, sleek vessel, elegant in design, far more refined and purposeful-looking than the plain, scuffed survey ship that had first alarmed Seskar months before. This, Director Osei said, is the ISV Meridian, one of our current generation defense vessels. It is, admittedly, considerably more capable than the survey ship your patrol first encountered. Grand Admiral Vok, watching from his seat among the military advisors, studied the readings scrolling beside the hologram and felt his heart sink slightly, despite months of preparation for this exact revelation. The numbers were, as expected, considerably higher than anything the Wandering Star had displayed. However, Director Osei continued, her tone remaining calm and measured. I want to be very clear about something important, counselors. Humanity currently maintains fewer than 200 vessels of this class, spread across our entire territory. We are not, and have never sought to be, a conquering power. Our military exists, as it always has since the end of our war with the Vareth, purely for defense, and even then, we maintain it at a scale we consider the minimum necessary for genuine safety, rather than any larger ambition. Cortho Dral studied the hologram carefully, his armored frame shifting slightly. 200 vessels, of this capability, still represents a considerable force, Director. It does, Osei agreed honestly, I won't pretend otherwise, Counselor, but I would ask this council to consider something in return. In the 6 months since our first contact, humanity has taken no aggressive action of any kind. We have not expanded our territory. We have not increased our military production. We have, instead, spent that time exactly as we told you we would, building trust, sharing knowledge, and working toward genuine partnership. She paused. Power without restraint is dangerous, counselors, but I would gently suggest that restrained power, freely disclosed rather than hidden, is instead the foundation of trust between neighbors. High Counselor Urena Voss studied Director Ose for a long, thoughtful moment before finally speaking. Director, may I ask a more personal question, one not officially part of these proceedings? Of course, Counselor. Given everything your people endured, the wars, the long, difficult path toward unity, and finally, toward peace, what is it precisely that humanity hopes to find here, among the wider galactic community? Director Ose's expression softened, the careful diplomatic composure giving way, just briefly, to something more personal, more genuine. Honestly, Counselor Voss, we're hoping for exactly what we finally found among ourselves, after all those long, difficult years. Neighbors we don't have to fear, a chance to build something better than constant conflict. We spent far too long fighting each other before we learned that lesson, Counselor. We'd very much like to skip that particular mistake this time around, if the galaxy is willing to meet us halfway. The grand chamber fell into a thoughtful, almost peaceful silence, the earlier tension slowly giving way to something warmer, more hopeful. Even Cortho Dral, whose caution had rarely wavered throughout the long months of careful diplomacy, found himself giving a slow, respectful nod. The Threxian Assembly, he said finally, his deep voice carrying a note of genuine sincerity rarely heard from him, withdraws its objection. If a species capable of what we have seen chooses restraint and honesty over conquest, then perhaps this council owes them the same courtesy in return. High Counselor Urena Voss allowed herself a small, relieved smile. Then let us proceed to the final vote. All those in favor of granting humanity full membership within the Galactic Council, with all rights and responsibilities held by every other member species present, please indicate now. One by one, hands, claws, and other appendages rose across the great circular chamber, until finally, the vote stood unanimous. Then, it is decided, Urena Voss declared, her voice carrying warmly through the crystal chamber. Humanity is hereby welcomed as a full member of the Galactic Council, effective immediately. A soft, genuine wave of applause, translated awkwardly but sincerely, across dozens of different species customs, filled the grand chamber. Director Ose bowed her head respectfully, a small, genuine smile crossing her face, as the weight of 6 long months of careful, patient diplomacy finally settled into something lasting. Later that evening, aboard the Common Ground, Director Ose sat quietly with Ambassador Lyra Sen, sharing a simple meal in the ship's modest dining area, the formal proceedings of the day finally behind them. May I ask you something, Director? Lyra Sen said, now that the official business is concluded. Of course, Ambassador. After everything we've been through together these past months, I think we've more than earned a bit of honesty between friends. Lyra Sen smiled softly at the word, appreciating it more than she might have expected. The Wandering Star. The very first ship encountered by Captain Sess Carr. Was it truly just an ordinary survey vessel, exactly as it appeared? Director Ose laughed softly, a warm, genuine sound. It really was, Ambassador. Captain Okafor wasn't exaggerating or hiding anything that day. It was simply an old habit of ours, built into everything we make, without us even fully realizing anymore just how it might look to someone seeing it for the very first time. An old habit, Lyra Sen repeated quietly, thinking back to that very first sensor report, the panic it had caused, the fear that had rippled outward across an entire galaxy, all from something humanity itself considered entirely unremarkable. Old habits can be strange things, Ose said gently. Sometimes they're born from real pain, real fear, things we never want to forget, no matter how much time passes. But I like to think, Ambassador, that the best of those old habits, the caution, the care, the quiet strength, they can become something new over time. Something built not out of fear anymore, but simply out of the wish to keep the people we care about safe, while still reaching out, carefully, towards something better. Lyra Sen considered this quietly for a long moment, watching the soft glow of distant stars through the dining area's small viewport. I believe, Director, that this council, and indeed this entire galaxy, is fortunate that humanity chose to reach outward again, after all this time. Director Oseye smiled warmly, raising her simple cup in a small, informal toast. To new neighbors, then, Ambassador, and to old habits, slowly becoming something better. Lyra Sen raised her own cup to meet it, the soft clink echoing gently through the quiet room. To new neighbors, she agreed, and to a galaxy wise enough, in the end, to listen before it judged. Far beyond the quiet warmth of that small shared meal, out among the vast, star-filled darkness of the gray line, this wandering star continued its own quiet work, mapping distant asteroids, humming old, familiar songs through its worn, scuffed hull, entirely unaware of just how much its simple, friendly hello had changed the shape of the galaxy above it. And across 1,000 worlds, in council chambers and quiet homes alike, a new understanding slowly took root, one built not on fear of humanity's hidden strength, but on the quiet, hopeful lesson that even the deepest old wounds, given enough time, enough patience, and enough courage to finally reach outward again, could grow into something far better than anyone, human or otherwise, had first dared to hope for.